Uh, So, good morning, sir. We would like to welcome you formally, and we'll start the online lecture of Professor Dipankar Gupta. So, on behalf of the University of Lucknow, Department of Sociology, and all the faculty members, all the research scholars from the Department of Sociology, University of Lucknow, and Dr. Manohar Lohia Chair, we welcome Professor Dipankar Gupta. And I would like to introduce Professor Dipankar Gupta. He is a public intellectual, and between 79 to 80, he was working with Center of Social Studies, Surat. After that, he joined Jawaharlal Nehru University as a faculty member in
Hello.
1960. And can you please mute all of you so that we can listen to Professor Dipankar Gupta. And yes.
सर को अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा.
हाँ. म्यूट ऑल में सबसे रहेगी.
नो प्रॉब्लम, जब होगा तो बोला जाएगा. आज क्यों अनम्यूट ना, वो बोलेंगे बाद में.
राइट. हो गया ना?
सर को पहले बोलना पड़ेगा.
हाँ.
अभी नहीं आप
सर आपको अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा क्योंकि मैं सबको म्यूट कर दिया.
यस
Yes, sir, done. So he taught at Jawaharlal Nehru University nearly 3 decades and retired as a professor in 2009. For a brief period between 91 to 93, he was also professor in the Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi between 2012 to 2015. And he was also distinguished professor at Srinagar University. Professor Dipankar has authored 16 books and edited 6 books on subjects such as ethnicity, agrarian movements, caste, stratification, modernity, and citizenship. He has also published over 100 research articles, and his also current interest is in the relationship between sociology and public policy. The last 3 books he authored are Checkpoint Sociology, a cultural reading of policies and politics, 2022, India Test Social Theory, Oxford University Press, 2018, and From People to Citizens, India Must Take the Road, Routledge, 2017. He was also the co-editor of Contribution to Indian Sociology for over 15 years, and he served on several boards such as National Security Advisory Board, National Broadcasting Standard Authority, Reserve Bank of India, NABARD, and Doon School. He is also emeritus professor of Jamia Millia Islamia University. He was awarded the Knighthood of Art and Letters by French government and received an honorary causa degree from Burdwan University, West Bengal. He is also recipient of Malcolm Adesia Award. With this brief introduction, I would like to say Professor Dipankar Gupta has some connection with the University of Lucknow because his academic advisor was Professor Yogendra Singh. So, with this small introduction, we would like to listen to Professor Dipankar Gupta. So, over to Professor Dipankar Gupta.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Sahu, for your very kind introduction. I would have liked to deepen my ties with Lucknow University, but for the fact that the weather is very poor, and it wasn't very safe to travel. And I was right, because today the weather is very bad in Delhi and planes have been delayed and landing and takeoff problems are in place. However, now that we have Zoom, we can always overcome these hazards. And can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah, okay. So the topic of my lecture is about modernization. And I wanted to bring to your notice the difference between modernization as a singularity and modernization as a relationship between people. Am I audible to you?
Oh, you are audible, sir.
Am I? Okay. Hello? Hello?
Sir, you are audible. Sir, you are audible.
I can't see you. Can you see me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
I can't
sir.
see you. My screen is blank. Anyhow, so what I wanted to say was that if you look at modernity from a sociological perspective, I think we have to, in many ways, re-examine the concept, because so much of modernity today is seen in terms of things such as technology, modernity and technology, modernity and knowledge, lifestyles, waste, issues like that. For example, you would say that because of modern technology like guns, AK-47s, bombs, missiles, etc., we are modern. These are the significant markers of modernity. Or you might even say cars and multi-story buildings and skyscrapers make us modern. Or we might also say that those who have tremendous knowledge of science or any other subject, they are modern because they've kept up with knowledge. But in my mind, these are only external markers of things. The most important problem that we face in the study of modernity is when we equate modernity with lifestyles, such as fashion, Western ways of living, speaking English, traveling abroad, going to expensive restaurants, spending money, wasting money, in fact. All of these are often seen as examples of modernity. And in fact, it is for reasons of this kind that modernity has a rather disreputable, aura about it. Nobody really says nice things about modernity. They always bring it down, or tend to bring it down, for being kind of negative and also uncaring of human welfare. And that is what I want to correct in this brief presentation of mine. For you will see in history and also in anthropology and sociology that human beings have been flawed in many ways through time. But human beings are also trying their best to correct themselves. And I think there is no better example of this self-correction than in the concept of modernity, which I will try and elucidate to you. From times immemorial, people have fought wars, people have killed others, people have even wasted food. They have also destroyed nature. It's not only today that we are destroying nature, it's happened in the past as well. And those of us who've done some anthropology would know that the potlatch ceremony amongst the Kwaikult in the Native Canadians was really an economy of waste, much before consumerism came into the picture. So we have all these problems anyway. And then in today's times, it has become a little more complicated because there are certain kinds of lifestyles which I mentioned to you earlier, such as wearing clothes of a certain order, speaking a certain language, frequenting certain expensive or exclusive places. These have been associated with markers of modernity. In fact, there was a very famous Iranian scholar called Jalal al-Ahmad, who said many, many years ago, about 30, 35, 40 years ago, that what we see in Iran, which could also be said about India, is not westernization. What we see is something very noxious, almost poisonous. And he called it West-toxication, that we've been intoxicated by certain aspects of Western life in terms of things. And that is why westernization or West-toxication is rather bad and negative for human development. I think that's an interesting point. What is westernization? Is it West-toxication or is it modernization? In fact, you might remember that M.N. Srinivas, who wrote this terrific essay on westernization and Sanskritization, he didn't use the word modernization. And he didn't use it because he had a certain problem in mind. I'm being kind of interrupted. Is there a problem? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. Please continue, sir. We can hear you.
Okay.
Please mute all of you.
So did you hear the part about Srinivas? So Srinivas wrote this essay on westernization and Sanskritization, which all of you must have read and heard about. In that essay, the question that came up, and Srinivas raised it himself, Srinivas said that why don't I write about modernization and Sanskritization? Why westernization? And his argument was that modernization is not equal to westernization, because in westernization there's a psychic component, and that psychic component is perhaps absent in India, he said. But what is present is westernization, which again, as I was telling you earlier, has to do with things, that is, clothes, cars, discotheques, lifestyles. And he said, therefore, I will talk about westernization and not about modernization, because modernization, he said, has a psychic component which is missing in large measure in India. And I think the word psychic component is not a very happy one, because it is not really a sociological concept, but we know what he's really hinting at. That is, in other words, there's a psychological and a relational element in modernization, which is very important, and maybe that is not quite as strong as westernization is. Westernization is probably stronger than modernization because we affect certain lifestyles, but we don't have the mindset that goes with true modernization. Now, I think that's a very interesting takeoff point of departure. And I want to build my argument on this basis and try to impress upon you that modernization has to do with relations between people and not about things. It is not about guns, it's not about cars, it's not about lifestyles, clothes I wear, the restaurants I go to, the language I speak, none of that. But it has to do with relations between people. Very often we mistake.
Okay, don't make noise.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Sir, we can hear you.
Please continue, sir.
Continue.
Hello?
Sir, please
Sir,
continue.
we can hear you. You can
Okay.
continue, sir.
The point I was making, if you can't hear me at any point, please let me know so I'll stop. So the important point, therefore, is the relations between people and not the language you speak or clothes we wear or the places we go to or the discotheques and so on and so forth. Many years ago, by many years ago, I mean something like 1990 or thereabouts, there was an incident in a Delhi hotel where a particular politician's son was very angry with the hotel staff and with the guests there because they didn't pay enough attention to him. And he took out a gun, and I'm told he blasted the chandelier of the hotel room. And so many people then wrote in the press that, this is what's wrong with modernity. People don't have control over themselves. They carry guns and they go to discotheques, and all kinds of negative comments were made. And then it struck me that a person behaving like this wasn't actually modern. That person was actually pre-modern, but what that person had was a gun. And does gun make you modern? Where the person went to was a dance hall, a discotheque. Does going there make you modern? Not at all. Because none of these issues really raise an important aspect in sociology, which is relations between people. Why should modernity also be a study of relations between people and not about things? Now, if you look at all sociological concepts, each and every major sociological concept, say capital, feudalism, family, caste, you will find all of these are relational-based concepts. They're not about things. Capital is not about a wad of money. It's not a big fat purse. Capitalism is really a relation between capital and labor, between entrepreneur, management, and the working class. That is what capital is. It is not just pure money. If it had been pure money, then capitalism would have been from times immemorial. People from the time people had money. So capitalism is not about money. Feudalism, again, is about relations between people. What kind of relations you had between feudal lord and serf. It's not about land ownership alone. Likewise, if you talk about religion, religion is not about a thing called Hinduism or a thing called Islam or Buddhism. In sociology, theology is not an important aspect, or not as important, or not nearly as important as relations between people in a religious framework. For example, we often say that in Hinduism is a very different religion than Christianity or other Abrahamic religions, because in Hinduism, you don't really need a congregation. In Hinduism, you can pray alone. You can get moksha and salvation on your own. It depends on you. So religion, again, is not about theology as much as it is between relations between people. Relations between people in Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism is what makes it important in the sociology of religion. When we study religion in sociology, we don't study a thing. If somebody is speaking,
Professor Meena, could you mute yourself?
Professor Meena, please mute yourself.
Professor Meena, could you mute yourself?
What I'll do is I'll mute
नहीं कनेक्ट हो रहा रोल में क्या मैं
I'll mute
वर्ड्स भी कनेक्ट हो रही है
Yeah.
नहीं हो रहा कौन सा है मैम एक मिनट
Professor Meena.
mute वाला कहाँ गया?
तो मीना कहाँ है?
नहीं हुआ ना नहीं हुआ एक मिनट
Just will take 1 minute.
इससे हो रहा है
I'll have to mute everyone.
See, organizers can remove those who are not muted.
कहाँ गया वो वाला ऑप्शन इसमें? वो वाला ऑप्शन कहाँ है?
या तो कनेक्शन के बटन दिखाते अब हो गया होगा नहीं हुआ नहीं आवाज तो आ रही है बट कनेक्ट नहीं हो रहा
Professor Meena, could you mute yourself?
अच्छा नहीं हो रहा
क्या म्यूट करिए वो रिमूव
गन दबाने पर भी इसके उससे तो कुछ नहीं डायल इन पे जाना पड़ेगा
नहीं सर
वही हो जाता है जब नहीं होगा इससे तो आपको तो देखेंगे
Yes.
सर प्लीज कंटिन्यू
Yeah, I was saying that, for example, in religion, it's not about theology so much as the relations between people. So when we discuss different religions in sociology, we don't discuss the theological element as much as what is it to be a Hindu in terms of relations between people, or Islam, or relationships between those who follow Hinduism and those who follow Islam. So if we look at modernization as things, these things become mischief magnets because they tend to distract your attention. And because it's about things, and these things are not always very pleasant, it makes people nervous. It's like scaring the crows away. But modernization should be a very friendly and positive concept, and a very positive introduction into human civilization. And it's this that I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about guns, fast cars, speaking the English language, traveling abroad, wearing certain kinds of clothes. I want to emphasize instead what is modernization in terms of relations between people, and therefore we try and understand this like any other sociological concept. Family is a relationship between people. Caste is not about Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Shudras, Vaishyas. It's about how do these different castes interact and relate to one another. That is what makes it a caste system and not just a caste structure. A caste structure is hardly that interesting. What is really interesting is the caste system. And the moment we say system, we're actually talking about relations. So it is this relational aspect that I think requires some coloring in. We have the outlines, they have to be colored in. And let me try and color those in. So what do I think are the characteristics, relational characteristics of modernity? The most important relational characteristic of modernity is what I believe is intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is a word that most of us are quite familiar with. If you've read Gadamer or Habermas or any of those hermeneutic scholars, You will know something about intersubjectivity. But intersubjectivity today also has the added impression made on our minds by someone like John Rawls, in which he basically said was, we have a common horizon and we must function within the common horizon. So if you want to understand modernity truly, you must try and place yourself in the shoes of the other. See how the world looks from the point of view of the other person. To be oblivious of the other, to be uncaring of the other is not really modernity. To be uncaring and oblivious and think of things that I own a car, I go to certain restaurants, I travel abroad, I speak a certain kind of language in a certain way. These are things, these are oppressive notations, and they're not really about modernity. Modernity is more reflective and it releases you from these constraints. So intersubjectivity in modernity is a very important feature. Now, what happens in intersubjectivity, which you have read about in sociology and methodology? In sociology, intersubjectivity is a very cultivated disposition in methodology. You want to see how do other people behave and think. You don't want to see other people in sociology as objectified others, but you want to see them as if you are a participant in that discussion. And then you become intersubjective. You try to put yourself in their position. So when you talk about religion, you talk about village, you talk about caste, you don't say, oh, these people in the villages behave this way, or these people of this religion behave this way. You try and ask yourself that if I had been in that village, if I were with that background, if I were that religion from that particular strain, how would I behave? Where would I position myself? Which is why in sociology, which I think is a very modern discipline, in sociology, when we do fieldwork, we don't do fieldwork to study other people. We study other people to get a better knowledge of ourselves. So the most important thing in fieldwork is not coming back and saying people in X village behaved in this fashion, and these are the things I've noticed what they do in the morning, evening, and afternoon. Instead, the more important thing is to reflect upon it and say, well, this is what they do, and then your writing should be such where you also give the impression that you are a part of that society. You're not outside it. And this is what intersubjectivity is about. And this is the methodology of intersubjectivity. But in modernity, this intersubjectivity should become a habit. In sociology and in philosophy, it is a cultivated attitude. But in sociology, in modernity, it becomes a habit because you begin to think in terms of what other people do. For example, suppose I'm driving a car in Delhi or Lucknow or whatever. I may be a very good driver. I may be able to turn my car on a coin. I may be able to overtake, zigzag, and do everything else. But perhaps I'm not a modern person. I'm not a modern person because I'm not intersubjective. I'm not thinking of other drivers. I'm not thinking of how I'm inconveniencing other drivers. And because I'm not thinking of that, in spite of my driving skills, and in spite of the fact I'm driving a very fast car and a very expensive car, sorry, I am not modern. I'm not modern because I don't have any consideration for other people. And not having consideration for other people, such as on a Delhi street or a Lucknow street or wherever, that is a good example of how unmodern one can be. So modernity, therefore, has to do with something a great deal with our consideration with the other. This aspect of intersubjectivity is very important. So I would go a little further and say that in modernity then, if the other person is so important, then that is an aspect of ethics and not so much about morality. Modernity concerned with ethics and not as much with morality, and I'll try and tell you why. In morality, I can privatize it. I can say that this is what I think is moral. For example, I might say, I think it's moral that my children should be married off at a certain age. I think it is moral that there should be arranged marriages. I think it is moral that we should get up in the morning and do a certain number of things. These are moral attitudes that you have put forward. I know there was a very interesting case that happened some years back when a person was caught taking money from the institution's locker. And when he was apprehended, He said, I'm sorry that this has offended you, but you see, I have to get my son abroad on a scholarship and he didn't get one. So I'm a good father. A good father versus a bad employee, which is moral. So moral position can always be privatized. Do you know in Roman law, from which a lot of our contemporary law is based, in Roman law, there was one aspect which was really quite frightening. And that was this, that the children of a man and the man's wife were the man's property. And the man could do whatever he wished with them. Now, this aspect of Roman law was a very black and bleak aspect. And Hegel, who was a great follower of Roman law, he said that I like a lot of Roman law, but this aspect of Roman law, I just cannot stomach. And this is because in this aspect of Roman law, it was very moral, but it was not ethical, because it did not think in terms of other people. It privatized a certain attitude and said, this is moral. For example, I might say, I'm a vegetarian and I'm moral. But that may not be a moral ethical position. That may be a moral position for you to take. In fact, sometimes when people are doing just the opposite of what you think is your morality, you are rather happy about it. You might say that in this world of immoral people, I am the only moral person who stands out. But in ethics, you cannot be ethical alone. Ethics demands other people. And because of ethics, the consideration of other people, in my view, ethics is separate from morality, and ethics is about modernity. You know, you have heard of this Christian saying, which was there in Mark's, in the Gospel, St. Mark, that do unto others as you would like others to do unto you. Now, all of this sounds very good. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. But is it really a justifiable position to take in terms of modernity? I don't think so. Would you say that let other people flatter me because I flatter my superiors, therefore my inferiors should flatter me? Do you want that? Do you want to say that I like to take bribes so that other people take bribes as well? Or would you say, as some people have argued, particularly Hegel and Kant, that if the judge doesn't want to go to jail, I shouldn't be sent to jail either for doing something? Now, this aspect of do unto others what others would do unto you is not a very strong position to take. In fact, another Christian theologist, or Saint Luke, said that, remember, even saints, even sinners can do good. Even sinners sometimes help other people. That doesn't mean they're not sinners. So doing unto others what others would do unto you is not that good enough. It's not also good enough to say there's something called the universal law. That universal law may not be respecting other people and giving them equal status. Which is why, and here I would like to remind you of what Hegel said in his book, Philosophy of Right. He said that only ethics makes it possible for us to think of others as an aspect of ourselves. Now, if you look at the history of philosophy, I'm talking of Western philosophy, and there are aspects of ethics in Indian philosophy, at least I found them in two of the Upanishads. In the Western philosophy, you will find that up to the time of Kant, there was hardly any discussion on the other. The other did not function as an important element in Western philosophy. It was about the self. Even in Kant, you'll find in the critique of pure reason, it was about the self. How do I understand time and space? How do I understand art in the critique of aesthetics, critique of practical knowledge? It's only from the time of Hegel that the other became important in understanding your own predicament, your conditions, and your society. And after Hegel, you'll find everybody has the other in mind. For example, in Weber, is the other that is in mind when he talks about religion, when he talks about rationality, when he talks about bureaucracy. It is the other that he talks about. In Marx, it is the other again. In Durkheim, it is the other when he talks about religion. So the other becomes very important in Western thinking from that time onwards. And this aspect is a very strong aspect in sociology in general across the world, including sociology in India, for which reason Srinivas said, I would rather talk about westernization and not modernization, because I'm not sure to what extent we have that psychic component, which I am redrafting as we have that aspect of ethics in us, which is so important to the understanding of modernity. when Rawls said that, we should have a common horizon within which we function, it was this aspect that he was probably talking about. So if you want to give modernity a really good feel, a very positive description, then I think it can only happen in terms of the modern democratic nation state. Remember, all that is contemporary, like ethnic wars, like economic waste, like ecological damage, like urban squalor, like pollution that we see around us, all of these things that we are talking about, these are contemporaneous. These things are happening contemporarily. Because they're contemporaneous, they're happening in contemporary time, does not make them modern. Modern is not equal to contemporaneous. And this is the mistake that most people make. That if it is happening today, it must be modern. And someone like Eisenstadt, Samuel Eisenstadt, he talked about multiple modernity. And I think he made this very similar mistake, because he saw everything that was modern, contemporary, as modern. So he said the terrorists in the Middle East who are shooting up people, it's a sign of modernity, because they have guns, because they know how to operate drones, because they know how to operate technologies of war. Therefore, they are modern. They are not modern. They are in contemporary times, but they're not modern because we're mistaking modernity with things. And that is why people like Eisenstadt and many others like him, even in India, often talk about the notion of multiple modernity. And multiple modernity is simply an outcome of sloppy thinking. Because in multiple modernity, what we do is we pay attention to the contemporaneous and we pay attention to things. We don't pay attention to relationship between people, which I believe is a central feature, is a hallmark of modernity. And the relationship between people is about ethics, and ethics is other people. When other people become important in your life, then that is what modernity is. Now remember, it is not very easy to integrate other people into your life. It's not easy at all, I agree. As I said earlier, in intersubjectivity and hermeneutics, in philosophy and sociology, in methodology, we can cultivate the discipline. We can cultivate that frame of mind. But to make it an everyday aspect, you need the law. The law has to be on your side. And what kind of law is this? The law that puts citizenship in the forefront. What is citizenship? Citizenship is not about things. It's not about the vote. It is not simply about going to the polling booth and casting a vote. Citizenship is something very, very different. And therefore, I would like to emphasize upon you this aspect of citizenship, which was made famous some years ago by T.H. Marshall. And T.H. Marshall said, and see how closely that is linked to modernity, in my view. T.H. Marshall said, citizenship, please note the words. I'm sort of telling you from memory, but I think it's very close to what he said. Citizenship confers or gives you, confers an equality of status upon which structures of inequality can be built. Remember, it first gives you equality of status, and then it says, okay, go ahead and be unequal in certain other ways. Now, what does it mean to say you have equality of status? Equality of status implies that your life conditions are the same. Everybody has the same starting point. When we talk about level playing field, this is exactly what we mean. You start as equals. So, to have an equal starting point, a level playing field, you must have universal health. Everybody should be recipient of high quality medical care, and not that I have better medical care than you. If I have better medical care than you, then no matter how fancy my hospital is, no matter how many gadgets and gizmos it has, my hospital is not a modern institution because it separates me from other people. I may go to a very good school. I may go to an exceedingly high quality school which charges huge funds of money. But if the majority of people cannot go to that school, then that school is not an example of modernity. It is an example of anti-modernity. because it does not confer an equality of status upon which I can then build structures of inequality. So the first and foremost important thing in modernity is that every citizen must begin as equals. After we begin as equals, then go ahead, do whatever you want. You can be unequal, you can be a loafer, you can waste time, you can be a scientist, you can be a sociologist, you can be a stock market broker, you can be a capitalist, whatever. But your starting point should be the same, which is why the most important thing that they did post-war in Europe and elsewhere, and we are now trying to do something like that. I hope it will be successful. I'm not very sure, but I hope so. There are some indications. What we should try and achieve, and this is becoming part of our political discussion in recent times, that we should think in terms of making modern citizens in so much, in as much as they have universal or equal access to health, education, energy, and housing. These are some of the things that they should all have. Now, remember, these things are not easily done. I can't do it by the stroke of a pen. I can legislate, I can pass a law, but it can't be done so easily. That needs to be mobilized. There has to be political participation. So it is not do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It is first and foremost to create a condition where everybody starts as equals in every basic important way. Once they start as equals, whatever else they do is up to them. And this is what modernity is, because if you start as equals, you know that you resemble the other person in some very, very important aspects. Which is why Emil Durkheim once said, "My first and most important duty is to resemble the other." He did not say that my job is to be an individual and stand out. That you can do that later on. But the most important thing is that you should resemble the other. And in resembling the other, you actually give demonstration of your modernity. And the more and more you resemble others, the greater and greater chances are there of your intersubjectivity, of the fact that intersubjectivity becomes a habit and not something which is cultivated. Therefore, you must remember, in no society is intersubjectivity complete. Therefore, no society is complete in terms of modernity. I cannot say that society is totally modern or that society is totally modern. All I can say is that society is more modern than some other society, because modernity is a never-ending project. It keeps on and on and on and on. The moment you think you become modern, something else comes up and you know that you're not yet quite modern. You have to do more. For example, in 19th century, many people in Britain thought they were modern because men had the right to vote. And then they found that, well, what about women? And then they never thought about that earlier. And then they realized that they were not really democratic. So yes, now women have the right to vote. Then they thought, what about minorities? What about minorities? What about Catholics and Puritans and Jews and Muslims, etc., etc.? So then again, they said, okay, let's open it up even more. So bit by bit by bit, democracy grew. It was not as if it was given once and for all and people said, okay, now it's all done. Let's rest on our laurels. They didn't do that. And modernity does not let you do that. You may have heard of Fichte, the philosopher. Fichte had said, he was, in fact, the first person before Hegel who said that humankind is restless. They move from thesis to antithesis to synthesis. This is what Hegel picked up, and later Marx also talked about it. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, according to Fichte, is humankind is very restless. You cannot ever say that human beings will settle down and say, okay, I've done everything, I've reached the pinnacle, now forget it, let me just rest. No, the moment they've done something, they find another vision in front of them, another wall to climb, another mountain to surmount, and they do that. The moment they've surmounted that mountain, they see another mountain. And that's the synthesis. So human beings keep going from thesis to antithesis to synthesis. And this is exactly what modernity is. You think you become modern, and then you realize, I'm not really fully modern. There's something more that needs to be done. And then you strive for that. And that is how modernity keeps growing. Therefore, to say that some society is modern and has achieved it, come to its goal, that is a wrong way of looking at it, because modernity is a never-ending task. It's a project that never completed. The reason why I think the Hegelian version of Marxism had problems was they thought that with synthesis, history was complete. It was not. That synthesis became a thesis for more antithesis, for more synthesis, and on and on and on, because human beings are relentlessly restless. And this is something we should not lose sight of. So modernity, again, is a project which is never complete. Some societies are more modern than others, and I hope that if we see and are able to isolate those components of modernity, might even say those genetic components of modernity, we might try and emulate those and see them as important ingredients in our contemporary culture. If, for example, we think ethics is important, I think ethics is very important because ethics is about other people. Ethics is not morality. Morality is about yourself. I am moral. I am a vegetarian. I want my children to get married at a certain age. I want to settle their fortunes in the future. That is a moral position to take. An ethical position is when you say that my child, as Hegel said, my child is a small person, but my child is a little citizen. My wife is a citizen. We are all citizens. As citizens, we have equality of status upon which we can then build structures of inequality. Citizenship does not say that we shall forever be equal. No, no, no. Citizenship only says we will start as equals. And that is an important point. And because we don't pay enough attention to this, therefore, intersubjectivity doesn't get the kind of push and ballast that it needs to survive. So citizenship brings that to the forefront. So modernity with citizenship, what does it do? The fallout is you have to be publicly accountable. You have to be accountable to everybody for what you do. You can't just say that, that's it, I've done it and I'm moving on. You are living in a fishbowl in a modern society. You're living in a fishbowl, and whatever you do has a repercussion on others, and you're aware of the repercussion. Having said all of this, let me draw your attention to certain other things. What are the correlates of modernity? How can you say that, yeah, we are on the right track, we're doing something right, and this is a symbol of modernity or a sign of modernity, and well, this, though it looks like it is modern, but no, it's not quite. One of the things which I believe you can pay attention to is this. Whenever you see a society where there are great people, in a modern society, you will probably never find a Mahatma. Mahatmas don't do well in a modern society. Mahatmas do well in a non-modern society. In a modern society, there's no room for Mahatma because things are being done in an intersubjective way and things are being accomplished which make sure that citizens get equality of status. Mahatmas do well where this basic ingredient is missing. In India, for example, there are many Mahatmas. In many third world countries, there are many Mahatmas. As you go to a more developed country, let's say the Nordic countries, you'll find there are fewer and fewer Mahatmas. There are no great people anymore because everybody is more or less the same. And when everybody is more or less the same, where's the scope for Mahatmas? You have to have great people because when you see poverty, squalor, degradation, people dying, without medical care and attention, you are moved by it. You're not only moved in terms of your sensibility towards morality, you're also moved in terms of aesthetics. It's so ugly to see people dying the way they die, they live the way they live. In Delhi nowadays, when you used to go out, you often find beggars banging on your window. It's so cold, you can imagine what they're going through. And therefore, there'll be Mahatmas who will try and help these people. But in a truly modern society, there should be no room for Mahatmas, no need for Mahatmas. And in certain backward societies, I know, you can't throw a brick without hitting a Mahatma somewhere. So when you see Mahatmas, you must say, well, why do we have such great people? What is the need for them? And maybe our society is not quite modern. We have to make it modern so that such people, exemplary people, very good people, are not needed anymore. There's no individual in that sense, but the society that stands out, a society where, as I said to you earlier, the starting point is of equality of status. Or let's take another example. Very often you find a woman leader in a country, a woman leader in South Asia, a woman leader in East Asia, Southeast Asia. And when you see women leaders, you say, well, look, we've become modern. We have a woman leader. But how did that woman leader become a leader? Did that woman leader become a leader because she inherited the political mantle of her male ancestor, husband or father? Or was it on her own merit? Did she then become a leader of her own after she became an inheritor of the male mantle? Is that not true? If that is true, then, perhaps that fact that she's a woman leader does not really make the society modern. One of the examples which I like to give most often to illustrate what modernity is, you won't believe this, but you must try and sympathize with my position. And that is this: it is sport. Sport is a great example of modernity. Now, why do I say this? In the past, people played, but they played games. And games didn't have rules, universal rules. And usually these games were played at the behest of the ruling person, the patron. The patron could be a feudal lord, could be a king, could be an emperor, whatever. And games were played under his supervision. And very often the games of a certain kind that you never really won or lost a game, particularly if you were playing against your patron, you made sure that you lose the game. There was a great cricketer once who got out in the 19th century, and he refused to leave because he said, my mother has come to see me play and I'm going to go out right now. I want to play a little longer. And he was allowed to play because he had a lot of political clout. So there's something called games which people always play. But in modernity, you have sport. And sport is different from games. Why is it different? And the reason is very interesting. It's different because sport functions along universal rules that everybody knows and it makes everybody equal. You cannot say that because I am Sachin Tendulkar's son, therefore I should get a position in the test team. You cannot make any such claim. You are an equal like everybody else. So sport, first of all, equalizes everybody. It depends upon your talent, and sport is out in the open. I talked about transparency earlier and accountability. Sport is a very good example of accountability and transparency. In sport, you win and lose in the open in front of everybody. You play a game according to rules that not only the players know, not only the umpires know or the referees know, but the audience also knows the rules equally. They all know the rules. And because there are rules within which you play the game, therefore you excel in a sport. If you didn't have rules, you would never excel. You would never hit the shot that Sachin Tendulkar hit, or the cover drive of Virat Kohli, or the way in which Michael Jordan jumps so many feet, stands mid-air, defines the laws of gravity for a nanosecond, and goes up even higher. You won't do those things. You won't have a Pele. You won't have any of them because it is when rules constrain you, universal rules, that you strive to excellence. You will not strive to excellence if there are no rules. You are the patron, you're the boss, so there are no rules. You can do what you want to do. There was a very interesting little ditty, a poem in America in the days when the Kennedys were very powerful and the Kennedys were very rich. And the poem was like this. Robert Kennedy was John Kennedy's brother. The poem was, Robert Kennedy played football. He lost but would not yield, for Robert Kennedy said, what the hell, I own this football field. Now that kind of thinking doesn't work any longer. Nobody owns a football field in order to be able to change the consequences of a game, of a match. So there are no games any longer, there are sports, and because there are rules in sports are known to everybody, that you actually excel in sport. Very often people think that monkeys are free because they can roam around. But monkeys are not really free. We human beings are free because we function under rules which are equal for everybody. That makes us excel. If we didn't have those rules, we would be like monkeys. We do the same thing every day. Monkey see, monkey do. That is all. But human beings don't just see and do. Human beings go from thesis to antithesis to synthesis. And sport is exactly that. If you look at the evolution of sport, you'll find the kind of games, sport that people played, let's say cricket or football, 50 years ago and today is very different because the sport has evolved. People have become better and better and better and better. And this is the whole thing. So sport, in my view, is a very good example of modernity. The other example of modernity is fashion. Fashion is very modern. Now, what you might say, why is fashion modern? People have misunderstood fashion, especially in countries like ours. They think if you have high style, expensive things, expensive ornaments, clothes, you are fashionable. You are not fashionable. There's a difference between style and fashion. Style was when you stood apart from the rest. You had in 19th century Europe, for example, you had women wearing brocade, feathers in their hair. And even today, you have famous designers who stitch precious stones into your wedding garment, and your wedding garment becomes so heavy and so metallic that you can actually stand it over there. It'll stand on its own, doesn't need a human being. And that, they say, is fashion. But fashion is not for rich people. True fashion, look at any major fashion designer. They are not making money from rich people. They're making money from mass production. All the major fashion designers are making their money, their record, and their reputation, not by serving 5 or 6 rich people. Not at all. They make the reputation because they serve the mass. And you will find that the most interesting thing about fashion today is not to be separate from other people, but to look like other people. In other words, why is the blue jeans so popular amongst you and me? Because blue jeans look like everybody else. Now, whether I wear blue jeans made from a high-end manufacturer or I buy blue jeans from the street in a market in Delhi, it looks the same. It can be emulated, it can be copied, it can be vulgarized. And that is why blue jeans is fashion. It's not because it separates people from other people. In fact, what fashion does is what Emile Durkheim said we should do. That is, we must resemble the other. And in this, I would say that today modernity has a chance of growing even more because modernity has embraced democracy, not democracy simply in terms of things, that is voting, but democracy in terms of attitude, in terms of relationship between people, in terms of intersubjectivity, in terms of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, going further and further, and overcoming morality to embrace ethics, where other people are most important. And then you must also remember that you can never rest. Modernity is going on forever. It's a project which never rests. And you can only make sense of this if you abandon the notion of multiple modernity and first and foremost fix your ideas on what is modern. And then you can think of different ways of getting to modernity. Like you can say, there's one concept of nation state, but there are different ways of becoming a nation state. You don't say multiple nation states, everything is a nation state. No. Likewise, you don't say everything is capitalism. There's something called capitalism and the multiple ways of getting to be capitalist. Likewise, what I would say is that modernity is very important in terms of relations between people and the multiple ways of getting to modernity, and do not be sidetracked by things and do not be sidetracked by contemporaneity, because happening today, it is not modern. It's modern only if it's thinking about other people. It is an intersubjective element in it. And I think this intersubjectivity is a better word than what Srinivas earlier talked about, the psychic element. I hope I made some sense to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And we have some questions. Will you be interested in responding to those questions?
Why not? Why not?
So you can, those who are interested in, giving their comments, please.
I hope I have not taken too much of your time.
No, not at all. It was very interesting. And please unmute yourself, and please give your comments or questions, whatever.
Should I mute myself?
No, you can be there.
Okay.
So let's start with.
Please.
Sir, this is one of your students, sir, long back, 20 years back.
Hello.
So after a long time, I enjoyed your lecture again, sir. So basically, when you talked about modernity and thinking about others, so what we'll do when we think about post-modernity or extended modernity? Because when we think about others, it is also emphasizing that others is not about without thinking things and materials, resources. Because resources are also part of thinking others. So it is not about only relations. Relations are also simplified with the resources we available to them, or it is given to them in the name of the state or the nation or the individual as a human being to contribute others. So it is not simply others. The relationship are not a separate entity when you don't have any resources, because resources are also strengthening the relationship. And we can,
Exactly. So you see that there are two things here.
yes,
One is postmodernity. Now, postmodernity is a very vast subject. We can talk about it in detail at some other occasion, but let me give you my quick answer on postmodernity. In postmodernity, in all scholarship of postmodernity, the most important thing is that there is a, I think, unnecessary reliance on the subjective component. And this subjectivity makes postmodern unmodern. It is far too subjective in my view. For example, a postmodern view would say that this is the way I feel about things, and this is the authentic way of looking at things, because I see it that way. It is authentic to me, therefore it is right. And I would say no. It may be authentic to you, but science is one of communication. Postmodernity is not really interested in communication. It's interested in putting forward an authentic position according to the scholar. Now, the authentic position is a scholar's authentic position, and you can either buy into it or not. And the scholar is not bothered about it, which is why today, in my view, postmodernity has done great damage to social sciences. And this has happened because the earlier theories of social science were far too caught up with Marxism and functionalism and all those things, instead of looking at what I would say intersubjectivity and notions of citizenship. These are issues which go beyond. They will take something from functionalism, something from Marxism, but they have a separate status altogether, which was not really appreciated at the time when we were doing sociology, I think. And postmodernism built on that flaw and came up with this idea of authenticity, which I don't think is a great point of view to have, especially in the sciences, because in my view, and I don't think you can contradict that, in my view, science is about communication. Science is not good enough if it's only for me. That becomes morality. You see, I am moral, I am a scientist, I am authentic. But science can only work well if I can communicate what I think to you. So if I'm talking about India, then my sociology of India should be such that a person who has no idea of India, never been to India, can appreciate what I'm saying. Can understand that the concepts I'm using are the concept that he or she also uses. But in my use of the concept, those concepts have become enlarged. I put them under pressure. I made them work. And there's a greater degree of communication between me and that other person who is miles and miles away. You know, this is a very important aspect of science, the communication aspect. The second thing about resources. This is why I said to you earlier that modernities and citizenship are so closely connected, because in citizenship, the basic resources are shared by all. Education, health, housing, energy, these are shared equally. And then you can be unequal. If these are shared, that's it. That's the most important thing. Everything else depends on you. And because these are shared, therefore you'll find there's a great degree of similarity between you and other people. Wherever you find, there's a greater degree of universal health and universal education, there you will see, and I'm sure you will notice it too, that people are very similar. They don't need to show off. I've not been for too long a time, but whenever I go to Northern Europe, the Nordic countries, I'm surprised at how simple people are. They have no, desire to, decorate their living rooms or, drive fast cars or, just exemplify in their everyday life that they're different from others. They're quite happy. In fact, they make it a point not to stand out. It's so much more fun to be like everybody else. And when I studied fashion very closely, and I found that from the time of the 1920s onwards, when Coco Chanel came into the picture, you will find all that expensive stuff went out of the window. What came instead was a little black skirt, which was tailored in a certain way, which could be vulgarized, which could be copied. In the 1990s, in 2000 in France, the Chanel had come out with a particular design for a jacket. And I found that on the streets of Paris, they were easily available. Anybody could buy them. They were all vulgarized. And they said to me later on that if it can be vulgarized, that is good fashion. If it cannot be vulgarized, it is not good fashion, it is style. In India, we don't see fashion. I'm sorry to say, we see style. Why is that so? Because we are always different. We don't walk. You don't see people on the streets walking. We go in a car somewhere, we get to sit in another car, go somewhere else. We sit in another car, meet somebody with a car. We don't walk. We don't share public transport together. We are different. And that is what actually is an impediment to modernity, because we can't share in the lives of other people. So modernity is not only one where you don't need Mahatmas, is also one where you don't have people walking around with expensive clothes, or at least showing off the expensive clothes. You should be in a situation where there is no need for demonstration. Everybody is the same. And I think blue jeans is a very good example of fashion today.
Thank you. Dr. Atri, would you
Yeah.
like?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Good morning, and thank you so much, for this speech. You're always exclusive in your speeches. So I'm Dr. Atri. I'm associate professor in the Center for Studies for Social Systems in JNU. So I have this particular question that when you're talking about synthesis, antisynthesis, it's antithesis, synthesis, and thesis. I would like to bring the question of indigenous community in this particular aspect.
Sorry, bring the question up.
I would like to bring the question of indigenous communities.
Indigenous,
the
yes.
communities and the indigenous communities, right? So I have this particular question that why is there at all a need always to bring into this particular explanation that, we always try to say that indigenous communities are not modern. We have to make them modern and bring them into the mainstream economy and so on and so forth. But they have their own notions of ideas of development. They do not want to come out of certain aspects of their ethos, which is completely bound in their communities, right? So over there, I have this particular understanding, what exactly, how do we, explain this particular theory of, or is there at all any need of thinking whether there has to be a theory of synthesis, thesis, and antithesis or not? So this is the only thing which I wanted to ask.
Let me try and explain that, answer your question. First of all, the point that you raised earlier, which is a valid point, that should we bring them into the quote-unquote modern mainstream, you will notice that when you talk about modern mainstream, we're actually talking about things. We're not talking about relations between people. We're talking about things. Now, if you want to make them really modern, you should integrate them in terms of relationships, and once relationships become important, then that barrier that you talked about, indigenous ways of life and non-indigenous ways of life, those barriers will slowly recede.
Yeah.
Reason why we don't quite succeed in doing that is that because we want to thrust a particular lifestyle made up of things upon indigenous people, not just indigenous, on other people, So if you observe, as let's say you're linguistically different or you're culturally different, we want to force you into some straitjacket, right? And that forcing is done in terms of the hallmark of things. You see the point? Now, if I were in a position where I could really, exercise some degree of authority, I would say, let's try and make the indigenous people, such that they see no barrier between their relationship with us and our relationship with them. That is what is very important. So I think one very good way of doing it, and I may be wrong, but I don't think I am, one very good way of doing it is to make available to the indigenous population the same standards of education, health, energy, and housing that others have. And then let them be the way they want to. Let them be the way they want to. If they want to worship certain gods, let them worship them. Who stops it? They're not coming in the way. You see, the difference is ethics is not about non-interference. Ethics is about being together. Non-interference is something else. That's a kind of a weird, universal, abstract idea. Ethics is about other people, you're together. And this togetherness is what matters very much. And I feel that in the indigenous community's case, and I've seen in my own experience with such communities, that if you were to give them the kind of opportunities that some of us have, they would be very happy. But they're not happy because they are made to give up certain aspects of their lives to be able to access those opportunities. Why should that be the case? Have I answered your question somewhat?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
A.K. Sharma from IIT Kanpur, please.
Sorry, who's speaking?
Yeah.
Sir, I am A.K. Sharma. I retired from IIT Kanpur. A question that comes to my mind, you are saying that modernity is a continuous process. So, in contemporary India, we have relatively more modern sectors and relatively less modern sectors. I just want to know what is modern citizens or more modern citizens' ethical responsibility towards those who are unmodern or less modern, but who have means of power, who have more access to means of power.
Who are what?
All
Sorry,
kinds of,
I'm sorry.
what is the ethical responsibility of more modern persons, more modern
Okay.
citizens
Yes, yes.
towards those who are less modern but who have access to power?
Yeah, good. I mean, the responsibility is exactly what I'm doing today, trying to put forward the view that if you want to be really modern, don't talk in terms of things, but talk in terms of relations. Put yourself under pressure. You see, unfortunately, what happens is that we get confused between ethics and morality. Very often, morality clouds the picture, and ethics is what you need to clear the ground. And it, as I told you earlier, it is not an easy job. And here again, I must go back to Hegel. It is Hegel who said that if you have a democratic state, then that is the greatest help you can get to further the cause of ethics in society. And I think the democratic state is something that is not given in advance. And I would like to make this point again, that democracy is the most difficult thing in the world. It is not easy at all. We try to think that democracy is easy. We think it is easy because we make it a thing, voting. But democracy is very difficult because democracy is other people. And it is about citizenship. But if you have democracy, if you can get democracy on your side, to a large extent, again, democracy, like modernity, is never a completed project. But it is through the agency of democracy that you can try and be as modern as you can, and also to be able to, in a way, sift those who have power but are unmodern in their ways of thinking. What also happens that they have power and unmodern the ways of thinking, but they blindside you because they live in quote unquote very modern lifestyle. So you don't realize that they're really very unmodern people. So let's take Vidyasagar and Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the two great Bengali figures. Vidyasagar dressed like a Bengali. He wore dhoti, kurta, sometimes a shawl in winter. And Michael Madhusudan Dutt wore a top hat and jacket and suit and tie. Who was more modern? I think Vidyasagar was more modern because Vidyasagar wanted to educate women. He wanted to have widow remarriage. He wanted to equalize society. Michael Madhusudan Dutt wanted to take on Hindu ways of life. He was, I'll eat beef, I'll wear a suit, and I'll speak in English, and things like that. Madhusudan Dutt was also a very good Bengali scholar. So in my view, it was Vidyasagar who was more modern than Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Gandhi was more modern than many other people who wear suits and clothes and stuff like that because of his ways of thinking. So the way of thinking is very important, how you integrate others into your life.
Yeah. Professor
Dipankar,
can I raise it? Can I just put a small observation of mine? I'm Professor Pari.
please,
From
Professor.
Bhubaneswar. Yeah. I just want to extend my comments on the observation of Madam Saha. She referred about the indigenous communities. I just last 1 year I completed a study on the indigenous most primitive community in Odisha, in western Odisha. That is maybe Professor Sahu can supplement. Is a Banda community, Banda tribe. See, neither the Bandas are western nor they are modern. They live in hill tracts, completely isolated. When I talk to them across the society, they are very much rigid about mixing with modern culture or liking to shift from their own traditional way of culture to modern society. They say that if any amount of modernity or westernization is influence them, they will be losing their own culture, their own identity, and their own society. This is a kind of fear which I observed during my field work. So they are at a crossroad. Neither they are modern nor they are Western. They want to preserve their own values. And I wish that Professor Gupta will reflect when we talk about the indigenous communities, particularly the tribals. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think my answer would be very similar to what I said to Professor Saha, that most of the indigenous people, not just indigenous, even the poor in India, in cities and slums and so forth, and villages, of course, you'll find a large number of them are very apprehensive of modernity as things because they have not had access to it. And they feel that they're being deprived and oppressed by it. So if you go to the tribes you're talking about, they probably look at people like you and me as oppressors. And they see us and our clothes and the way we talk and the transportation that we usually employ as symbols of oppression. So that is the problem I'm trying to make vivid. That is, unless you're able to make that ground equal, it will not happen. You cannot just go to them and say, you must go to school. What kind of schools do you have? You don't have hospitals, you don't have schools, you don't have proper roads, and then you ask them to be modern. Isn't that a joke? The most important thing is that make these things accessible. Ask yourself, if you had been in that village, if you had been a member of that tribe, you too would have said, I don't want modernity, because you would identify modernity with these things, with these people who are oppressive. These people who live a lifestyle that is completely inaccessible to you, completely inaccessible to you. So why should I even dream of it? There was this Coca-Cola advertisement, I think, or Pepsi-Cola or something, I forget, where there's some drink, I'm not sure which one it is, where they showed people, traveling in planes and coming down in parachutes and drinking that drink. And that advertisement had to be taken off because most people who drank that liquid didn't travel in planes and didn't jump off parachutes. There was no commonality at all. So this is the argument that some of the best advertisers make, that you must advertise a product in such a way that you can touch it and you cannot grasp it, but a little effort, maybe you can grasp it. So that should be there. Now, a tribal community that you talked about, their lives and our lives are so different, they can't even imagine it. My point is about modernity is make everything imaginable, near at hand, accessible. Once you do that, let them be different. Let them follow their gods. Let them follow their burial custom, their tribal rites. There's no problem at all. I think that those who say modernity means anti-religion is rubbish. Why should be anti-religion? You're modern. You pray in your own way, of course. You have certain, as long as you are modern and you don't trample upon that notion of equality of status, which is conferred on everybody. As long as that is respected, go ahead and be as different as you want to. Unfortunately, these poor tribals and indigenous people don't have that option because they don't even know about it. And what they see is scary. What they see is frightening and alienating. This is my view on the subject. Because whenever for example, I spent a lot of time in Jharkhand, and I found that many of the so-called backward people, I'm using the word so-called because backward and forward is, again, unmodern way of looking at things. These people, if you give them the right opportunity, they're better than us. They do much better. And they want that opportunity. When they don't get it, they get upset and they reject you. But if you give them the opportunity, they embrace it. And I was so impressed with so many people. When I was in JNU, teaching in JNU, I was delighted. My best experiences in JNU were when I met students who came from quote unquote backward areas, and they ended up being scholars of the first degree. Those were my most rewarding experiences. And so many of them are scholars, not just in India, they're teaching abroad, So they're that good. But they got the opportunity that they were looking for. And I think most of these communities that we are talking about, we don't give them the opportunity. We just say, we do this and do that. And, that's not fair. It's very unfair. They can't even go to school. I've seen so many instances where they are wading through a stream to go to school, raging river, and they're going to school. Why should anybody do that? I've been to villages in East UP, and I've spent some time amongst the carpet weavers, and I've seen families that are actually below poverty line starving themselves in order to send their children to a private school in a village, a private school that costs 60 rupees a month. They're starving themselves to get that 60 rupees. No parent.
Oh. Next question. My God. Reject.
The university